Dave Harden, today's guest, received the Presidential Award for Distinguished Service by President Trump in 2019 for sustained extraordinary accomplishment in foreign policy after being appointed in 2016 by President Obama to serve as Assistant Administrator of USAID. He shares insights about his superpower, understanding local people. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. Dave, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation today. It's a thrill to meet you.
Great, Devin. It's great to be here, too. I'm so excited.
Well, you have had such an extraordinary career. There are a few people that I meet on the show that I really feel like the just genuine jealousy over the career they've had. But you're one where I look at what you have done and I think, man, I wish I could have done that. That would be such a joy. But you spent most of your career at USAID. And it's my favorite government agency. And you weren't just a career flunky there. You had real responsibility throughout your career, big response. And then President Obama appointed you to be an assistant administrator. And that title for people outside of the Beltway doesn't mean a lot, but that means you were a big deal. You had to be confirmed by the United States Senate.
Right.
And then, of course, you continued to serve after that, serving in that appointment at USAID, and President Trump awarded you. What was the award? Tell us about the award.
So I got the highest award in the Foreign Service for protecting and defending America from Donald Trump of all people. But I was very honored to get that. And as you mentioned, under the Obama administration, I was put up to be the assistant administrator for all democracy, conflict, and humanitarian assistance programs around the world. And I was confirmed by all the Republicans and all the Democrats.
Yeah, that's just wild. It's just such a great sign of the respect that you have in the world. But to be appointed by one president and recognized and awarded by another from another party really speaks highly of you. Now you're running a firm called Georgetown Strategy Group. It seems to be a private initiative of doing USAID stuff. Tell us a little bit about Georgetown Strategy Group.
So let's be clear that there's a lot of government contractors that basically are the arm of the government and implement some of their activities. And you would see that with any number of implementing partners through the U.S. Agency for International Development or USAID. That's not who we are. What we do is we don't actually do any government contracts. What we do is we look at crises and trends in the world ahead, and we try to align capital, talent, and technology to blunt those challenges that we will see that are coming down the road 10, 20 years down the road. So, we see that with climate change, but we also see that with conflict or financial systems, etc.
It's a fascinating world that you're able to make that into a business. And the team you've assembled, it's an impressive team.
Thank you.
I was really surprised at the depth and breadth of the team that you've assembled in relatively short time since you left USAID. So I'm impressed. But give us one example of a project you're working on at Georgetown Strategy Group.
So part of the premise is that government can't do everything, and governments around the world can't do everything. And so we need to be able to leverage both public and private capital for very focused outcomes. And I'm actually going to give you two examples. So we work with communities, companies, or countries that are in crisis. So I did a lot of work with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, Lincoln Laboratory, and we developed a system that is an early warning system for long-range climate impact. So USAID, for instance, had a famine early warning system that would be able to tell 6 to 9 months out that this part of the Horn of Africa or Southern Africa or the Arabian Peninsula is going to have a food crisis. And that allows us to get there in advance and blunt that food crisis. I did a lot of that, and I oversaw that when I was with USAID. So at MIT, we developed the concept of the climate resilience early warning system that allows us to look out 10, 20 years to identify where climate impact will be at the 1 square kilometer level, and then to unleash both public and private capital that would help people decide to either mitigate or adapt to the changes that are coming their way. So it's a very highly focused long-range forecasting system. So that's one example. I'm going to give you one other example. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been mired in dysfunctionality forever. But I stepped in to help a group of investors, including Israeli investors, who were investing in Palestinian tech startups. And the company that I was asked to help assist needed to get some turnaround because, venture capital is a very high risk, high reward, high outcome undertaking. And so my team swooped in to help the Ramallah-based team try to turn it around and to grow. Now, in that instance, we ultimately failed. COVID kind of crushed everything in 20, I guess it was in the spring of 2020 at this point. But these are the examples of things that we try to do. Countries, companies, and communities in crisis.
Wow. What great work. What great work. And I'm sure you're drawing on the experience you had at USAID. And one of the things that I want to just dig into a little bit, because it just sounds, so incredibly exotic, scary, dangerous, but you helped reopen the embassy in Tripoli.
Yeah.
After it was closed. My gosh, that's a scary time to be in Libya, and you helped restart USAID's programs there. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, you were right. It was dangerous and yeah, full stop. It was dangerous. So I flew in with Gene Kretz, who was the ambassador at the time, and we went in with a very big security detail. Libya was still very much in the middle of its civil war. Gaddafi was still in power, but he had left Tripoli and the militias had taken over. This was in 2011, in September of 2011. And so we arrived on the ground. It was extraordinarily dangerous. The State Department doesn't have the appetite for these things anymore after Chris Stevens, who was a friend and a colleague, was killed in Libya. But so we came in, and my job was basically to kind of restart both the economy, the governing systems, and to blunt the humanitarian crisis. And what I was most proud about is, normally in these kinds of crises, America wants to be seen as doing something. And so we bring in the Mercy ship, or we fly in C-130s full of meds. And, in many ways, it never works. It just is more of a symbol than a solution. But what I was able to do is to draw down Libyan money that was held in escrow at the New York Federal Reserve. Use that to jumpstart the private sector, both equipment manufacturers and suppliers and repair folks, and the pharmaceuticals, to come in and immediately restart the healthcare system. And it didn't cost American taxpayers anything. We used Libyan money, and we used the private sector, and we were able to turn around impact very, very quickly. By the way, that lesson is a lesson that's actually applicable in Afghanistan right now. And I've been engaged in that effort in Afghanistan about using their money, their resources to restart and blunt the humanitarian crisis. And actually, the New York Times just interviewed me the other day about the collapse of their banking structure and what some analogies would be, either in Libya or in Yemen.
Well, it's fascinating to think about that. Let's talk a little further about what you would do, given all of your experience in that region of the world. What would you do to help get things back on the right track in Afghanistan?
So let's begin with a couple baseline assumptions. I think America is tired of Afghanistan. The pullout was chaotic and and in many ways extremely suboptimal. I mean, I felt like that the Biden administration could have done much better on Afghanistan. I personally probably wouldn't have left. I would have kept a small contingent there. But whatever, they made the decision. The exit was terrible, and we are where we are right now. In these kinds of crises, what folks may not fully appreciate is that a lot of it relates to the banking system and the collapse of the banking system and the collapse of the currency and the devaluation of the currency and hyperinflation. All of these things drive humanitarian crises in a much more profound way than what is really, the result of, let's just say, conflict. So I'm going to use Yemen as an example, and then I'm going to apply it to Afghanistan. When the currency devalues, it's not food aid that makes the difference. Okay, in the case of Yemen, food aid comes in and helps 5% of the population, the most vulnerable set of the population. But 95% of the food imports are made by the private sector. So the private sector and the entire supply chain and the ports and all that has to work, or else you'll see a collapse of food prices and food commodities, and you add into that hyperinflation, and it just breaks everything. That's similar right now in the situation in Afghanistan. And so what I would do is, because you're seeing a devaluation of the Afghani, you're seeing a breakdown in trading systems, you're seeing a move to other currencies, and you're seeing mass humanitarian crisis. What I would do is take some of the funds that the U.S. has control of Afghan reserve currencies that are in New York, put it into a trust fund that would be administered, that would allow the private sector to trade and to build up food stocks while the UN continues to provide assistance to the very most vulnerable.
Well, it sounds like a great start. You also spent some time in Iraq. Tell us a little bit about your experience there and how that has influenced your career.
Yes, I spent 17 months in Iraq. My job in Iraq was essentially to draw down our civilian assistance presence at that time. This was also in 2012. And so, we had to carve back all of our assistance programs, whether it was for infrastructure or electricity or banking support or trade support or support to civil society and hospitals. And at the same time, have the Iraqis begin to step up. Now, the Iraqis it's not a poor country. They have resources, they have capabilities, they have a big history. And so I worked very hard to get them to step up. And I would go so far to say this. Look, we had a lot of politics around both of those wars. And it was in many ways, a polarizing set of issues for America. Set that aside for a moment. Where we are with Iraq right now is it's not bad. Iraq is functional. The outcomes are acceptable. They retain independence. They certainly are independent of an Iran, for instance. And so in many ways, Iraq has turned out to be an acceptable outcome. And Afghanistan, where we had a lot more reason to go in, was an absolute collapse. And I think part of the reason is that at the end of the day, the Iraqis had to take ownership. They had to use their resources, and they had to decide whether they're going to succeed or fail on their own. And so there was more of a bottom-up approach as well as a top-down, but in Afghanistan, it was mainly a top-down approach, which failed.
Yeah. Important lesson learned. Important lesson learned. Dave, you have been extraordinarily successful. I've already confessed my explicit jealousy for the career you've had. But one of the things I've learned over the years of visiting with people, great people like you, is that there are lessons I can learn. And as I think about that, I started asking folks about their superpower. So Dave, what is your superpower?
So I am running for Congress in rural Maryland, and I grew up in Trump country, what is now Trump country, right? I grew up in rural Maryland, and 50+ years ago, it was even more rural, um, and I feel that America is facing a very real inflection point about the future of our country, about the future of democracy, about the future of inclusion, which means, in my case, including rural people into our economy. The inflection point also asks us whether rural communities will work in the future, or will all of the economic and political power centralize in urban cores, right? And I think it's incredibly important that we make all of America work, including the rural areas. Now, I spent 30 years working with forgotten communities around the world, where economic grievances drove political conflict. And what I learned is that you have to listen to the local people. That if you don't include the local people, you can't accomplish anything. And so, for instance, climate change or the pollution within the Chesapeake Bay or questions of overfishing, all of that surround my district. And we have spent billions and billions of dollars trying to clean up the Chesapeake Bay from a top-down approach for the last 50 years without success, because we failed to include the local people. We failed to include the watermen. So just like you cannot save natural resources or create opportunity in a game park in Kenya if you exclude the villagers, just like you can't create or you can accelerate war in West Africa with diamonds, blood diamonds, if you exclude the locals, right? In America, in my district, in Maryland, and around the country, we must listen more closely to the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations and the concerns of local people if we hope to get beyond where we are in America today. So what I have learned, being both rural and from this area, and then being blessed to represent America around the world for practically 30 years, what I have learned, the superpower, if you will, is that understanding local people is key to driving outcomes for a better future for our country and for the world.
That's a fascinating topic. I was talking to a fellow just recently who, two people, a man and woman, Meg Massey and Ben Robel, who wrote a book about philanthropy and impact investing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about the importance of participation from those that benefit. And it's exactly a parallel, I think, to what you're
Yeah.
talking about, that if we aren't engaging the people we hope to help in the solutions will fail. And so that is a profound insight that you offer as your superpower. As you think about that, how would you encourage other people to begin to implement that participatory thinking about all of their activities aimed at solving social issues?
So you raised a great example, and that's impact investing, social impact funding. And that is primarily private capital that goes in and is married to both some type of public support and some type of local civil society organization that is on the ground. And the point there is that this kind of social impact financing is designed to buy results, not process. And for the example of, let's say, cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay for the last 50 years, we've bought process. Okay, and it's easy to get hooked into that, right? We want to clean up the bay. Environmentalists are good people. The bay is polluted. Throw money at it, right? But at the end of the day, you're not buying results. In Afghanistan, we did not buy results. We bought process, and I would say, including the local people, making sure we're being very rigorous about what results are, making sure that those results are, clear, crisp, and achievable, and then driving towards that is going to be the outcome. Now, social impact investing brings together, private sector capital and the skill set that those folks have, recognizing that they don't have kind of the community-based understanding and don't work with, local NGOs very effectively. But the NGOs understand the people, and then the government provides some kind of overlay, some kind of objective way forward. So to me, that's a great example of what's possible, and I think that drive for results over politics or process has got to be how we think about the next decade.
Yeah. Well, these are important principles. As you reflect on how you came to this conclusion, I wonder if you could just identify some examples of how you implemented the local participation with success to help us see how we make it work. Because
So
you did that a lot, I'm sure.
I did, and here's the bottom line. I spent a lot of my time on Israel-Palestine issues. I was a negotiator with George Mitchell during the Obama administration. I held the economic file, but in addition, I also ran the USAID programming in the West Bank and Gaza for practically a decade. That money is highly politicized. And no matter what you do, 50% of the people are arguing against you and saying you did a lousy job, right? And so what I really, really was able to focus on is if we are taking U.S. tax dollars and we're not building a school in the eastern shore of Maryland and we're building it in the West Bank, then we got to be sure that we're building it in the West Bank. We got to be sure that it's being used for good purposes. We got to be sure that there's value added to the American taxpayer. We have to be sure that it's also linked in deeply to some higher level outcome, which is, less conflict. And so given the fact that I was under such heightened scrutiny so often on so many of these big issues, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, West Bank and Gaza, and given the fact that I grew up in rural, in rural community where, a hard-earned dollar is a hard-earned dollar, so you want to make sure you get something from it. That was kind of my galvanizing point. And so what I have found is that if you are like, if you want one good example, is that we were able to deconflict the northern West Bank between Israel and the Palestinians by simply creating a sustainable trading route. So that small businesses could sell their goods to the entire world, and that kind of virtual upcycle of allowing economic opportunity to blossom helped create, it lowered unemployment, it improved governance, it created jobs, it created private capital that could be reinvested in other productive businesses. It lowered the risk that militias would be disruptive. We bought essentially calm and stability in the northern West Bank for a decade.
Yeah, it's a great example. Great
And
example.
by the way, it cost almost nothing.
Wow, that's the benefit of
Yeah.
this ground up approach. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today and with our audience. It's just incredible some of the insights you've been able to share. You've had such a tremendous career. Before you go, I wonder if you'd just take a minute and tell people how they can connect with you, maybe learn a little bit more about your campaign and engage and support you in that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So it's hardenforcongress.com, HARDEN for Congress.com. Check me out. Even though I grew up in rural Maryland, my website embraced the fact that I worked all over the world. And I was not sure how that would translate. But what I found out is that the watermen and the farmers and the small business folks, they think, oh, you know what? This guy worked all over the world on economics and economic development. Maybe he learned something and he can help us and can help us do better. So it's hardenforcongress.com. My Twitter is, at Dave_Harden. And I need all the help we can get, because you know what? We have the risk of rising authoritarianism, and we need to make sure our economics and our politics work for everybody. I know what it looks like when it's failed, because I've worked in those places, and I'm really committed to making sure we can build a better American century for our kids and our grandkids going forward. So check it out, hardenforcongress.com. Thank you, Devin.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate you being here, and we wish you every success in your campaign.
Thank you. Have a great
All righty.
day.
All righty. Let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers, 4, good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.